Katie Bradford Osborne. I'm the founder and curator of Roaring Artist Gallery. We are a fully virtual art gallery who exhibits the work of exclusively women identifying and non-binary artists. And we're here today for the second of our Borrowed Time exhibition artist talks. And the first one was amazing. If you haven't seen it on YouTube, go and see it as soon as you can. But this one's going to be amazing too, I know, so I'm really excited. So we're going to start with Michelle Waters, and I'm going to read your bio, and then I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Michelle Waters was born and raised in Los Angeles, California, into an artistic, progressive artistic activist family. She has been making art since she was a small child and has a BA in art from University of California, Santa Cruz. Her art expresses concern for the loss of the natural world and human exploitation of animals. In addition to making art about the extinction crisis, she has been an animal rights, environmental, and social justice activist since the 1980s. Michelle donates a portion of the proceeds of her art to grassroots animal and environmental organizations. She is also a member of the Art of Compassion Project, an international collective of vegan artivists, oh, I love that word, who use their art to support animal protection organizations and raise awareness, and of Hinge Artist Collective, another international artist collective. She is represented by Cactus Gallery and has shown her art widely in the US, as well as multiple exhibitions in Europe with the Art of Compassion Project. Later this summer and fall, she will have work in the box show at Gallery Route 1 in Point Reyes Station, California, and she will show with an international group of vegan eco-feminist artists at the TAG Gallery in Los Angeles in The Absent Reference, an exhibit inspired by the work of Carol Adams, author of the seminal eco-feminist book, The Sexual Politics of Meat. She paints in her home studio in the redwood forest of the Santa Cruz Mountains of Northern California and finds the wildlife and trees a source of inspiration, even as this bioregion is experiencing massive ecological changes from the climate crisis. All right, Michelle, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Well, thank you for that great intro, and thank you for reading my bio and organizing the artist talk. And also thank you, Shannon, for curating this show and including me. Okay. Now can you all see me?
Yes.
Okay. So sorry about the technical problems. Okay. So, oops, let's go back. So, there's me in a goofy cat dress in front of my painting Spectators for Destruction. And as Katie said, I'm an activist as well as an artist, and my art is influenced by nearly 40 years of activism. I started out in my late teens in the anti-nuclear movement in the early 80s, and from there got involved in feminist activism, eco-activism, and animal rights. And I consider myself an eco-feminist, meaning that I view the oppression of women, animals, and the earth as all coming from patriarchy. I've worked with grassroots animal and environmental groups on various campaigns, anti-hunting campaigns, both in working to get voter initiatives passed and also doing civil disobedience, anti-logging activism in the redwood forest near where I live in the Santa Cruz Mountains, marine mammal anti-captivity advocacy, and direct action against vivisection, to name just a few of the campaigns I've been involved with. And when I was younger, I also worked as an adoption counselor at an animal shelter for several years when I was young, and previously volunteered in wildlife rehabilitation. And I'm telling you all this because all these experiences have been really instrumental in forming my views about how our relationship with non-human animals is really way out of balance. My paintings are a response to the biological annihilation of the sixth mass extinction, which we humans are causing. And I recently came across that phrase, biological annihilation, and it's one that is being used by scientists. And I think it's really striking and really apt for what's going on. In the last 50 years, 2/3 of all wild animals have been wiped off the face of the earth due to human overpopulation and overconsumption. Right now, domesticated mammals are 60% of mammal life on the planet. Humans are 36%, and wild mammals are just 4%. And the same or similar statistics are with birds. 70% of birds now on Earth are farmed birds. And those numbers have really staggering implications for wild animals. And I've lived in the Santa Cruz Mountains for almost 30 years and have really seen the evidence of this. And I know a lot of people see it, the evidence everywhere, particularly insects. Insect populations are just crashing, and really see that where I live. And bird populations, we used to have a lot more wild bird species here than we do now. And in contrast, 10,000 years ago, humans were 1% of vertebrate biomass, with all wild animals, mammals, birds, everything at 99%. So this next part is from the Center for Biological Diversity, an environmental organization that I support. The demands of raising animals for food and growing their feed crops, that's I think the big one, contribute half of all agricultural emissions and occupy 30% of the Earth's surface. So almost a third of the Earth's surface, and that's not even including the oceans. I don't know how the ocean figures into that, but that's a lot. And it's also, important to note that all kinds of claims can be found on the internet, including greenwashing from the cattle industry, which is spreading self-serving misinformation like cattle grazing is good for the environment. I saw something recently that somebody posted on social media that they were saying that where cows graze, it rains more. And I thought, that's like not even, that's not a possibility. That's not even a thing. So while the climate crisis is front and center in our consciousness right now, it's really a symptom of our extreme disconnection from the natural world and our pervasive belief that humans are the most important species and that we have a divine right to do whatever we want to the planet. Also, a lot of people, probably most people, really still believe that non-human animals are not intelligent and don't have emotions. And fortunately, there's more and more scientific evidence that that's not true. So my first two paintings that I'm going to show are not in borrowed time, but I wanted to show them so people can see some of my evolution as an artist. The first is Luddites, which I painted in 2002, so that was 20 years ago. And Luddites is the big painting. It's 40 inches by 40 inches square, and it was influenced by my experiences as an Earth First activist in the 80s and 90s, working on a variety of issues affecting wildlife, including fighting timber harvest plans in the Santa Cruz Mountains where I live. And it's one of a series of paintings which depict wild animals sprouting opposable thumbs and taking back their world from human domination. The next piece I'm showing tonight is in the same series done several years later. It's called Land of the Free. And it was painted, probably I started it like right after Hurricane Katrina, maybe like a week after, which was when I first realized that the climate crisis was here and starting to affect us. I was also feeling very burnt out after 5 years of George W. Bush and his oil wars, and that was another influence. I painted Land of the Free for a solo show at Humboldt State University's First Street Gallery in Eureka, California. So my art now still addresses the same issues, but my focus is more creating beautiful work to entice the viewer in and then give them the facts of what my art is responding to, the direness of the extinction crisis we're in. I'm going to move to the work in the current exhibit. Okay, so this painting is called Consequences, and I painted it last year for a show with Hinge Artist Collective. It started really, I had a beautiful reference photo of a melanistic jaguar, and I wanted to paint it, and I was thinking a lot about the Amazon rainforest and how it's been being burned for cheap burgers for decades. And even more so now that Bolsonaro is president of Brazil. It's just a disaster down there. The burning is happening to directly raise cattle and also to grow the soy, the GMO soy that they eat. So this is the reality behind McDonald's and Burger King. And then as I was painting this, the other thing that happened is the heat dome and consequent fires happened over British Columbia and the Pacific Northwest. And Shannon's shaking her head. She went through that, and that was really, really scary for everybody. I think just seeing something unprecedented like that. So the next piece in borrowed time is called A Waswas Land, and this is probably my most personal piece in the show. It depicts the Santa Cruz Mountains and the endangered apex predator that still exists here, the mountain lion. Our other apex predator that lived here, the grizzly bear, has been extinct for the last 100 years in California. The Waswas people are one of the divisions of the Ohlone people, and I live on a Waswas land. Ohlone is the colonizer name for the Native Americans in the San Francisco and Monterey Bay area, so I don't use that name. In 2020, we had a mega fire in our mountains, which was most definitely caused by the climate crisis. And I think everyone else who lives here has been trying to process what happened ever since then, and painting this really helped with that. Awaswas land is my painted love letter to the land that I've been blessed to call home for the last several decades. And in addition to the mountain lion, those are tiger lilies. They are native to the old growth redwood forest that used to completely cover our mountains before being clear cut in the late 1800s, early 1900s. The next piece I have included in borrowed time is called Chomolungma, which I'm struggling to pronounce right. It's a Tibetan name for Mount Everest, and that's a snow leopard and Tibetan Buddhist prayer flags. Snow leopards are just absolutely beautiful cats. They live in the mountain ecosystems of Central Asia, and they're listed as vulnerable on the IUCN Red List, and that is the International Union for Conservation of Nature Red List of the threatened species. And like other wild cats, they're predators, of course. And so herders killing snow leopards for retaliatory killings when they kill their livestock is a really significant problem for this species, especially as human population and rural development have both increased and opened up livestock grazing in previously remote parts of the snow leopard's range. There's a really great organization that's helping to deal with this, the Snow Leopard Conservancy, and they are addressing that issue of conflicts between rural people and the snow leopards by working with the local people to create predator-proof corrals for their domestic animals, and also to help them develop alternate income streams so families are not solely dependent on their domestic animals for their livelihoods. So I'm at the end of this, I've got a slide that has organization and book links, and the Snow Leopard Conservancy is also in there, and also Wildlife Conservation Network, which is a great kind of a umbrella for funding for similar organizations in places like Asia, Africa, and South America, where scientists are working with local people to help them, to help species, basically, to help the people, but also to help the species, so that the local indigenous people are not so dependent on their livestock for their livelihoods, and are more apt to let the animals that are predating on them still exist. The next one, and my last piece in borrowed time, is called Amazonia. And this is an ocelot and a bromeliad flower, and they're two species of the Central and South American rainforests. Ocelots formerly ranged into Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas. There's still a remnant population in the lower Rio Grande Valley that is diminishing quickly, mostly because of development. And this species was nearly made extinct in the US by hunters, both because ocelots predate on farmed animals and also for their fur. And I think it's really important for us always to remember the species who've already become locally extinct, because that's how all extinction starts, and like on a local level, place by place. Another example besides the ocelot is the jaguar, which used to exist in the southern US, and in the 19th century was still sighted as far north as Colorado and coastal Louisiana. Now, I knew that there were still jaguars in California in the early part of the 20th century, but what I did not know until I started doing research for this talk is that there were jaguars spotted in Monterey, California in 1919, which is just crazy. That was not very long ago. But habitat destruction, and the other big one for a large carnivorous predator like the jaguar is competition with cattle and sheep ranching, which is the same reason that today our grizzly bears, wolves, and cougars and coyotes are being killed off. So those are my 4 pieces in borrowed time. I'm going to show a couple of my newest pieces. And this is Breathe Life. It's the last painting that I just finished. And I wanted to include it because one of my goals with my art is to help the public understand the politics behind extinction. So I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes version of this. This is the situation with wolves in the United States is really complicated. It's been going on for a long time. I painted this as a piece for the Hinge Artist Collective show Released. And it's really tragic what's happening. Both major political parties are selling out the gray wolf, and the species is getting closer to extinction. The first thing I got to say is that the Trump administration was absolutely the most disastrous for wildlife in US history. George W. Bush would be a close second, but Trump and his Interior Department weakened the Endangered Species Act. They removed Endangered Species Act protection from the gray wolf in 2020, right before the election, or was it right after? Anyway, right around the time of the election. Anyway, last year, a federal judge mostly restored protection, but there's a glaring exception to that, and that's in the Northern Rockies, where the famous wolves that were restored to Yellowstone National Park in the 90s, they live there. And without legal protection, the states of Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming are on their way to killing 85 to 90% of their wolves. And that's exactly what's been happening for the last couple of years. At least 20% of Yellowstone's beloved wolves have been killed so far in 2021 to 2022, because once they cross the park's boundaries, with no legal protection, hunters are waiting. And like I said, this is the Cliff Notes version. This is just a very sad situation. And unfortunately, Democrats are not any better on this issue of wolves than the Republicans are. The problem with government kowtowing to the ranching, oil and gas, mining and logging industries and being unwilling to list species on the Endangered Species Act is not a partisan issue, it's a systemic one. And to throw in something about the monarch butterfly, that's exactly what's been happening with that species under both Obama and Trump. So back to the wolves. Over 200 Native American tribal leaders have petitioned Biden's Interior Secretary, Deb Haaland, to demand emergency relisting of gray wolves under the Endangered Species Act, which would save the Yellowstone wolves and wolves in that whole area from being shot by trophy hunters once they leave the park boundaries. So not only has the Biden administration refused to do this, Secretary Haaland has refused to meet with tribal leaders. And Democratic Senators Amy Klobuchar and Tammy Baldwin have worked to remove legal protection for wolves for years. Both of them are in the Upper Great Lakes area, Wisconsin and Minnesota, and their wolf populations there. So, obviously they're doing this for their own political reasons. Cattle ranchers have a lot of political power within the Department of the Interior too. And it's really the same situation in state fish and wildlife departments. In Washington state, there's one cattle rancher who has been refusing to protect his cattle from predation. And every couple of years, he gets the state's fish and wildlife department to kill wolves for him multiple times. He won't protect his cows. One time he had an entire pack of wolves killed by the state. So what this also means, from a financial standpoint, is that the general public is paying for endangered species to be killed with our taxes, and we're paying for this for private businesses. The US has some of the strongest environmental laws on the planet. Our environmental laws are incredible, but our politicians and government agencies go against the best available science and the law over and over again in favor of the extractive industries. Politicians are paid off by corporations, and as those campaign contributions make them complicit in the extinction crisis. And it's also really worth noting that the Endangered Species Act, Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, and the EPA were all passed and signed under President Nixon. A lot of people don't know that. And I don't think Nixon was any friend of the environment. He was not a good guy, obviously. But in the early 70s, there was so much public pressure to protect our air, water, and wildlife and wild places that politicians had to support this kind of legislation. They had to. I mean, the Endangered Species Act would never get passed now, but it was supported overwhelmingly by both parties when it was passed. So we need to reduce our impact on wildlife as individuals. Corporations are obviously a huge cause of the crises we face, but we also need to not underestimate the value of personal lifestyle changes. Both are necessary if we're to have any hope at all of planetary survival. Trying to use less plastic, not using poisons, particularly rat poisons, which travel up the food chain and kill predators, consuming less, staying away from products that contain palm oil, trying to buy organic whenever possible, all are important. And I'm definitely not perfect in this. I don't think that there's a way for anybody in our society to be perfect with all this, because we live in a very extreme capitalist society. I paint with acrylic paints. They're the product of the oil and mining industry. I'm not thrilled about that, but that's what I'm doing now. So, I really understand that there's no way for any of us in our society to have no negative impact on wildlife, but that doesn't mean we can't try to minimize it as much as possible. So that last statement brings us back to farming animals for food. It is the #1 cause of species extinction. There's multiple studies that corroborate this. And in 2017, the World Wildlife Fund released Appetite for Destruction Summary Report, which found that excessive animal product consumption is responsible for 60% of all biodiversity loss. And they specifically cited animal feed production as the largest culprit. So, as I said, that's one of many studies. World Wildlife Fund is a very mainstream organization. They're not extremist. And there's one link that I'm sharing in my final slide to an organization called Truth or Drought. And they have a whole page on their website that compiles all these studies together, so you can see them if you're interested. So my last painting, it's a round painting. I recently started painting on rounds and really like it. It's kind of actually jarring going back to rectangles after painting a few rounds, but anyhow, this one is called Waning Pangolin Moon, and I painted it for a group show at Cactus Gallery in Los Angeles. Pangolins are the most illegally traded mammal in the world. It is estimated that more than 1 million pangolins have been snatched from the wild in the past decade. They live in Africa and Asia. All 8 species of pangolins are considered threatened with extinction on the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species. And their imperiled status is due to exploitation from poaching, both for consumption of their animals and their body parts in locally where the pangolins live, and also trafficking them and their scales internationally, mainly to satisfy China and Vietnam's luxury meat and traditional medicine markets. So in closing, I wanted to share a few organizations, all of which I think are doing really important work. Center for Biological Diversity is one of the most important legal organizations for all wildlife, including plants, in the country. I think they're doing amazing work. And they also use science to fight for endangered species. I've also added a few books here. The top one, This Land by Christopher Ketchum, I just finished it a few weeks ago. I think it's really essential reading to understand how government agencies give up control of our public lands in the West to cattle and sheep ranchers especially, but also besides ranching, he goes into mining, oil and gas and logging industries. And Sea of Slaughter by Farley Mowat was one that I read in my early 20s. It's one of the books that turned me into an activist. He talks about how when Europeans came to North America, we basically did to wild animals what we did to Native Americans. And it was a very hard book to read, a really important book. There's some of the things, even though I read it like almost 40 years ago, I'm old. Some of the really striking things, one of them is that polar bears are not really from the North Pole. Polar bears existed all the way down to Maine, and they were killed off. There used to be gray whales in the Atlantic Ocean. There's not anymore. It just kind of goes on from that. So in closing, I just want to say nature is my church, and that idea is really reflected in my art. The natural world is sacred. We humans really need it for our physical sustenance, but we also need nature for our spirits. I think we need our non-human animal brothers and sisters for our spirits, and without them and without wild nature, our lives are impoverished. And I will stop the share now. And I'm seeing some familiar faces.
That was wonderful, Michelle. Thank you so much for sharing all of that.
Thank you. I know that it was a lot to absorb. So anybody who wants to ask questions or email me about anything, please do.
It is a lot, but at the same time, it's so important. And I'm so thankful that you're here in the show and telling us about these things.
Thank you, Katie. And thank you, Shannon, too.
Do we have any questions or comments for Michelle?
Quick one. You kind of mentioned about your research, but I know you're very educated in a lot of this stuff, but when you're kind of diving into a painting, do you do your research first or during the painting, or do you have like an idea and then go with the research and then make the art? Like what does that order kind of look like for you?
Oh, yeah, good question. So it depends. It really depends. Like, I've really been trying in my earlier work when I was younger, like some of the pieces I showed in the beginning, I didn't focus so much on putting, like if I painted an animal, I wouldn't try and put only other animals or plants that are native to that area. Now I do, because I think it's really important. Like I'm speaking for ecosystems, not just, not just one species, right? So it really kind of depends. Like I know for the ocelot painting, ocelots exist from southern Texas all the way down through South America. So what part of their habitat? And I wanted to do the rainforest. And then, I started researching rainforest plants. And this, it's a matter of finding good reference photos, finding reference photos that we're legally allowed to use. That's a big one, but it really depends. Sometimes I've started with a reference photo like, consequences, the melanistic jaguar, I didn't put any specific rainforest plants in there, kind of just palm type plants, because the focus of that painting is much more, it's really kind of obvious about climate change in the Amazon and fire. And, but yeah, it really kind of depends. It depends on the original reference photo I have and, how far I want to take that.
Thank you. That wolf painting also was beautiful. And it just, so are people hunting them just like for trophies? They're not using them at all? Like,
yes, because you don't eat wolves, right?
Yeah.
And it's just horrible. It's a horrible, sad situation. Like I said, I mean, somebody who knows a lot more than I could talk about this for hours. It is just horrific. And there are lawsuits. And one thing I didn't bring up, I have a friend who is a wildlife lobbyist for Sierra Club. He's working on this issue. He said that the Biden administration is not going to relist the gray wolf completely under the Endangered Species Act because it's an election year and they want Wyoming, which I want them to have Wyoming, but can they please relist the wolves?
Wow.
So anyhow, that it's really important to note, like talking to different people who are working for endangered species in different areas, I think it's really important because then you learn things like that. Like, oh, okay, that's why.
It's disappointing.
It's really sad. Yeah.
It's really disturbing how many things it turns out are political.
I know.
It is.
Yeah. And despite the fact that I talked all about the politics of this, I really don't like politics. Like I just kind of study them so I understand what the heck is going on, but it's not something I enjoy. I like painting and I like being in the wild,
In the chat, Pat said, on top of that, wolves are shy and gentle creatures, not the vicious monsters that mainstream media likes to portray them to be.
Well, that's the other thing. Yeah, that is definitely the other thing. This is kind of a weird thing to throw in here, but I'm just gonna throw it in. I remember many years ago, I was reading about wolves and the history of wolves in Europe. So wolves were made extinct in in England and Scotland in the late 1400s. And so, for same reasons is going on here, people don't like that they predate on their domestic animals. So this ties into what I was talking about being an eco-feminist and my view that the oppression of women and the oppression of nature and animals is very much linked. I think it was like within a couple of years or right around the same time in the 1480s that wolves were made extinct in England and Scotland. The Malleus Maleficarum was released by the Pope, and that's the hammer of witches. That was the document that the Catholic Church released to tell people to go kill the witches. So I think, there's a lot to digest there, but I remember when I learned that like 30 years ago when I was busy reading lots of eco-feminist literature and the light bulb went on. I think it's just something really important to kind of think about and explore how those connections are.
Well, that was a similar type situation with propaganda, right? I mean, that's what our belief of wolves is based on, these stories and things, and it goes all the way back to even before then. And that's true of like witches and things like that as well.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Little Red Riding Hood, all, all of that.
Yeah. One question I had for you, I noticed in a couple of your recent paintings, is it moths, the gray moths that are in?
Yes.
I would love to hear about those. They're beautiful.
Oh, they're just moths. I love insects. They're not, they're actually, okay. So, yeah, with the pangolin painting, they're more just design elements, although I really, because that's a very surreal painting, and I wanted it to be night, and I like having moths in my night paintings. With the wolves, I started researching like what kind of moths live in Yellowstone, and that's what I came up with. And yeah, so anyway, I tend to put flying creatures in my paintings a lot.
I love that. I think they're
they're fun.
Shannon's smiling. She does a lot of
I know, yeah.
as well. Yes. But I thought they were beautiful too. I know a lot of Native American cultures, moths are a very spiritual type of creature. Right. And I feel like it gives it that sort of feel. And I love that.
Thanks.
Do we have any other questions or comments for Michelle? Thank you so much for sharing, Michelle. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Can I just say one thing? Okay, I'm Michelle's sister, and I've watched her art evolve through the years. And I just want to say that what you're doing now is so much more powerful because you're, like you said before, you're highlighting the beauty of each creature and what we're losing.
Well, thank you. I'm trying to suck people in.
You are.
I know. In the previous artist talk, Leah J talked about that in one of her comments, and but I think that there's so many ways to do this, right? I think that there's a lot of art out there that people are making that is not beautiful, that's about these subjects, that I think is really wonderful art. It's just as important. There's lots of ways, but this is what I'm doing now. And it's fun. It's more fun. Like when I used to paint really gory, depressing things, it was gory and depressing. This is.
Well, like the first two you showed are very large paintings, and they're not accessible to everyone. You have you're working smaller now, right. And people can buy what they like, and their friends can see it, and more people can see it too.
It's also easier to ship.
Yeah, there's that too.
That's a big one.
But I just think you're onto a good thing now.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, that's wonderful. All right. If we don't have any other questions or comments, we'll move forward. All right. Thank you so much again, Michelle. Next up, we have Tracey Weiss. Tracey Weiss is a ceramic and mixed media sculptor whose work often deals with environmental issues. Originally from San Jose, she has lived in the greater Los Angeles area for the past 20 years after receiving an MFA from California State University, Los Angeles. She has had an active studio practice in and around Southern California, as well as taught ceramics and 3D design at several colleges throughout the area. She is currently traveling full-time around the country on an open-ended wanderlust trip. And she's joining us from Colorado on her, we get to join in on her adventures. Just a moment, Tracey, let me pull up your pieces.
Thank you. And thank you, Katie, again for doing my slideshow for me.
All right. Just let me know whenever we'll start here. I'll do the first one and let me know whenever you want me to switch to the next one and we'll go forward.
Okay. So this series, can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. It's getting breezy, so I'm like a little panicked.
You're okay.
I've already lost the sun, so I can't lose the air too. So this series I did over a couple of years probably, and to tell you kind of where I got to it physically, as my bio says, I come from ceramics, mostly ceramic sculpture, more so than pottery. And and I've done a lot of different types of ceramic work. You can see that on my website if you're interested. But a few years back, probably more years than I think, and probably about 10 years ago, maybe, I started working with found plastic. And the reason being is, as the basis of this whole show, I really just started thinking about the environmental impact of doing art and various things. And, you know, on one hand, we're enlightening people and sending these messages, but at the same time, you know, things like ceramics, which ironically, it has sort of this mystique of being this sort of hippie kind of art form, but it's actually not very ecologically friendly. You know, we're mining these materials, the firing of these kilns, and then of course the work is here forever. Well, longer than we'll be here, let's say that. So anyways, I started thinking about working with found materials, and I didn't really find a medium that grabbed me. And then I started noticing there's so many plastic water bottles, and I didn't notice a lot of people using them in art, but it's just an obscenely plentiful. Oh, now it's going to get windy because I'm talking, of course. Let me know if you can't hear me, because I can jump inside if I need to. I didn't notice a lot of people using it in art. Now I see more, of course, because once you start doing something, you find everyone. But it was just this endless supply of this material. And as I started playing with it, I was like, wow, you know, once you cut these water bottles up and reassemble them into things that don't look like water bottles, it's a oddly beautiful material. It has this glass-like look, even though it's disgusting, it's plastic. But like I said, there was just so much of it. And I thought I wanted to use this ready material that's everywhere. And then also make a commentary on the plastic itself. You know, the very fact that it is everywhere, it's awful. And as Michelle said, it's, you know, we can't be perfect. We can do the best we can. But, you know, a lot of people don't even attempt to do a little bit good. So, you know, you see people constantly buying cases and cases and cases of these plastic water bottles. Anyways, so I started making work out of the plastic, and I did mainly these really abstract sort of hanging pieces. And then I really wanted to do something more with the concept of the plastic and the repercussions on us and the environment, animals, everything. So I came up with this body of work, and
I think we've lost you.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, you know what? I'm gonna turn off my camera because sometimes that helps get a better connection. Sorry.
No problem.
So if you think you've lost me, let me know. Or if it's the wind is too loud, let me know. So anyways, so I started doing these pieces, and I wanted to kind of do this fictional, although not really fictional, look at the future of what our fossil record will look like, because it will be full of plastic. And like I said, I mean, I was doing it in sort of a somewhat exaggerated way to make a point, but they are saying that plastic is showing up already. They have these things called plastiglomerates. If you haven't heard of this, it's sort of like plastic that's become fossilized in rocks. It's crazy.
Ooh.
So anyways, so I went to the Natural History Museum in Los Angeles, and I looked at how they display fossils. and I took just as much information from that as I could, and then I came up with these works. And the pieces that are in this show, there's two. This one here that we're looking at, and then the next one, they're both similar. There's sort of like 3 or 4 groups of work that go all into this fossil sort of body of work. So these here are displayed in frames.
I think we may have lost you again.
Okay. Is that better?
We can't hear you very well.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I've ducked inside, which is fine as long as I'm not doing my camera. It's not very convenient. Okay, so anyways, so these works here, like I said, this one and then the next one, they're ceramic bones. So I've made the bones themselves, and then I've taken found plastic and sort of incorporated it into them as I think might work. So this one that we're looking at now, I took the bottom of a soda bottle as if that would be like the shell of some kind of like a crab or something. And actually these two works that are in our show here are really, they're much more obvious, and they really look like animals. And I was looking at animal skeletons. A lot of the other works in the series are much more abstract because I didn't want it to be about turtles or about sea life or about specific things. I really wanted it to sort of just be obviously about living creatures, but kind of encompassing everything. So so this one here was based on I think like a sea turtle, and then if you zoom into it, you can see there's like a Perrier label wrapped around his shell, or where his shell would be, I guess. And then there's some other plastic. And then what I did was I kind of incorporated that plastic and then almost sort of heat shrank it onto there. You know, it hasn't been windy the whole time I've been on this until now. Sorry about that noise there. Okay, I hope that's better.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and then just because people asked me about it, the names of these, I sort of went in and was looking for scientific names of not only animals or, animals that somewhat resembled what I was working with. Like I said, some of them are more abstract, so it's not as obvious. And then I looked into the sort of chemical and scientific names of different types of plastic. So that's where those names come from. To be honest, I don't know them all. So sometimes people will, message me and they're asking about a particular work and I have to look it up because it's too abstract for me. I'm not a science person. Only right here, this pretend science that I do. Okay. So I think that kind of covers both of those. And then in this body of work, there were some other works that are in here that I created ceramic rocks, and then they are mounted on like wall mounts, as I saw at the museum, and then they have plastic sort of embedded in them. And these next two pieces that are in the show were the last pieces I did in this series, or at least as of now. I feel like this is a series that probably will get revisited in the future, but so these are working on the same idea, basically how these, are bones. you know, representing animals or life in general being basically captured and encapsulated in plastic. So this piece and then the next piece are both, they're actually those tiny water bottles that you see them at events sometimes. They're the most disgusting display of plastic ever, in my opinion. They're like half water bottles. Anyway, that's what these two are. One is the skinny, they're just different shapes, but they're both that real mini kind of. And I built these kind of bone, like this one's sort of a spine with a rib cage around it. The other one is looks more like a hand. And I built these out of clay, and then I cut them up, fired them, and then I reassembled them inside the bottle, and glued them back together like a ship in the bottle, which is insane. These two works probably took longer than any other pieces that I've done, and they're all about 4 inches tall. And I think there's 3 or 4 of these actually, but there's 2 here in the show. Not sure what else I have to say. I feel like I haven't talked for very long, but I guess I can go on to if anybody has questions about this. If you look at my photo here, you can see that's that's a plastic piece hanging. More of an installation piece that I've done.
Awesome. Thank you, Tracey. Does anybody have any questions? Or here, let me stop share real quick. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I have one. I was just wondering if you're familiar with the Wash to Shore program that started in Southern Oregon in Bandon, and they gather trash from the beach and plastic. It's all plastic, and they make art out of it. And they have a lot of those sculptures are on display all over the country. That's one went to the Smithsonian. We're in Portland, and one came to the zoo here. And they've been all over the country, and that's their method of bringing awareness to this issue. The gallery in Bandon, Oregon is phenomenal. If you ever get a chance, if you're in Bandon, they have limited hours, so you might want to look it up first. But they had like a coral reef that you walk through that's made of styrofoam. That's styrofoam. It's pretty powerful, you know, things like that. And then most of it is mostly animals. They did have they have a world map of the plastic problem in the ocean on one wall, but it was really phenomenal to see. So if anybody's ever in Bandon, don't miss it. Wash to Shore.
I saw that as well at the Houston Museum. I mean, the zoo here in Houston.
Oh, they had one there? Yeah.
It was amazing.
Was it a fish, or they've done penguins and fish and birds? And seabirds?
The biggest one that I recall had to do with fish, I believe. But there were other animals too, but it was some really large pieces. They were really
right. They're real large. And during the pandemic, they did a phenomenal thing. They had people working in their homes, and they would send them kits to put things together.
Oh, wow, that's amazing.
The master artists would put it together when they got there, because they are such big things. They would give each person something to do, and they had people all over the country involved with it. And it gave people something to do in the pandemic too.
Yeah, I think I've heard of other organizations. I think there's a few different things that that work in this way. These guys might be the biggest in this arena. I'm not sure, but I have seen several like shows and different things come through different organizations. I know in Los Angeles, there's like the Surfrider Foundation. They're always doing things sort of based in that kind of thing. But where is that museum again that you said in?
Well, Bandon, Oregon. It's a small town between Coos Bay and the Oregon-California border, and it's not a very big. It's a touristy town, but I wasn't aware of it, but we were walking through the downtown area, which is really nice. And we saw this great big fish made out of plastic. And then there was a turtle, a sea turtle on waves in front. So then we had to come back when the place was open, because it's not open every day. But we were able to go there and watch people working, and large groups of people sorting plastics, the colors, so they could pieces. So it's been a real. They've been going for over 10 years, I think. Yeah.
Huh.
What is the name of the organization again?
Wash Ashore.
I actually am wearing my Wash Ashore shirt.
Oh, awesome.
And they sell things like
super
that,
funny, but
made
yeah.
of plastic. I don't think it's 100% plastic, but it's like 70% or something. But they have a neat gift store too. But
So,
if you're ever in Bandon, Oregon, be sure and look for it.
I will, because I'm going to go to Oregon soon.
Oh,
Well, that's
It's
on the coast.
It's on my tour. Yeah, I've actually been through there. I mean, I've been, through just into the Oregon coast there. So I probably went right by it and didn't realize it was there.
Yeah, you have to go into the downtown area of Bandon. So it's like the Highway 101 is up high, and then you have to take this circuitous little road down into the old town part, which is a neat part to see too. It's full of nice restaurants and shops and stuff. It was really a powerful experience seeing all that plastic made into art.
Yeah, it's astounding how much plastic there is. I mean, I've since when I started working with plastic, I met a couple other artists in Los Angeles that worked with plastic, and we just talked about the endless supply and the sorting, and like you said, the sorting is such an ordeal. I would always joke that my studio looks like, I've got a gold mine for a homeless person in there, because I just had bags and bags and bags of plastic bottles. It was crazy.
Well, you need to hire a sorter then.
Yeah. Well,
that is a big job. We saw like 6 people at a table sorting plastic.
When I left to go on this trip, I put my things in storage, and I got rid of a lot of stuff, but I thought, what, those plastic bottles, there's more of them. that is a resource that is never going away, sadly. So I finally parted with them, and yeah, I took some to take them down to a recycle thing, but there's like a homeless guy that would cruise through my alley, weekly, and I was like, hey man, I got something great for you. Sent him off with a bunch of big trash bags. But yeah, I'm embarrassed to say I did keep a couple bags of plastic bottles that I don't think I'll find again. In my storage unit. They were like a really pretty blue, and you don't see that very often. But
That's awesome. I particularly loved how you were talking about showing your pieces like fossils. That was really interesting. I thought that really brings home the problem that it's going to be as we move into the future. Also, I really like fossils. I'm wearing them. But I think that that was just a really interesting concept that I have not seen before.
Yeah, I've really always been drawn to art that looks kind of like pseudoscience, but I've never done it myself. That's such a weird word, pseudoscience, but because it's not that pseudo, it's a little too real, but but that idea of making something fake that looks very real. So I really wanted to kind of capture that, and it's really interesting. There's so many things. I'm sure everybody can say this about whatever artwork they're working on, but it's like once you hook into something new, it's amazing what we don't notice normally. When you go to museums, you don't notice the mounts and how things are displayed, and non-art museums. we notice art museums, but other types of museums. It's kind of interesting.
It is. It's fascinating, and it's really cool how it's latched onto that.
I was that nerdy person that was like taking photos of the mounts that come off the wall. They probably were like, what is this person doing?
I love it.
Well, I really love what you're doing, and I have a question. It's probably, the answer is probably obvious, but for the ones in the bottles, did you to get everything inside the bottles, you cut the bottles open and put everything in, and then how did you do it?
Yeah, I did it like the ship in the bottle, like, well, presumably how the ship in the bottle works. I
Okay.
got those giant tweezers
Oh,
and I put a piece in there, and then I would put glue on another piece and go in, and I assembled it inside the bottle with tweezers. It was insanity.
That you do that, you should document it. That would be a really cool thing to see.
Yeah, right.
that's
I know.
awesome.
I'd have to beep it because there would be too much swearing and throwing of things. Yeah. In fact, that one that's in the show, it looks like a little hand. I had to when I cut all the fingers off. So I put the palm inside, and then in each finger I had to make a little hole and then glue a little pin inside, because when you go in, you can't hold it while the glue dries. It's, it's kind of crazy. So, but yeah, I had done some previously, just kind of working up to that, where I just kind of did these abstract bones, and I did cut the bottles open and put them inside, but I was like, yeah, that's cheating. I don't want to do that.
Mhm.
So, and of course I chose the smallest bottle they make, which was even equally stupid. Although, to be fair, the opening is the same size, so I guess it doesn't matter.
But still, that just seems really daunting to reach in there with tweezers, even if the tweezers are long. It just, I don't know. Yeah.
It is. No doubt.
I kudos to you for doing that.
Yes.
And I really have a knack for making things hard on myself. And if you look through my artwork, like just generally, there's always a level of insanity where people are like, oh my God, how long did this take? Or, oh my God, did you really cut these all out? Or there's always some level of that. And I don't know why I do that to myself, because I'm drawn to that work. I hate the process. You would think I love it. I remember talking to a group one time, and people were talking about how much they loved doing their artwork. And I was like, that must really be nice. I feel like I'm just in torture the entire time. And yet I keep doing it. I create the problem and I do it. I don't know why.
That's really funny.
Well, it's awesome what you're doing too at the end of that torture, but I am not, as an artist myself, I am not a patient artist. I cannot imagine. But.
See, I think I'm not patient in any other walk of my life. So I use it all up right in the studio, and then I leave the house and I'm just furious with everything and everyone.
Well, you have to be patient to doing what you're doing. I was just an aside, your turtle piece all of your work is really poignant, but that piece in particular really got to me from just experiences in Hawaii, and snorkeling in Hawaii. And there's this one time my husband and I went there, and we went to Molokini Crater, and it was full of plastic, and like, I mean, I actually just started getting handfuls of plastic. We went with an environmental organization, like the whale concert. I don't remember, anyway. They're a big organization in Maui, and I just started taking handfuls of plastic back to the boat, but it's endless. It's like you can never get rid of it. There's just too much, Yeah.
So, and then what the really damaging is what we don't even see, right?
Right.
There's all of the breaking it down of the plastic, and don't get me started on the elusive recycling program.
Yes.
It's like you said a lot of what you talked about, Michelle, I was like, yes, exactly. It's, we just have to stop buying those things, stop using them, because recycling isn't a thing that's happening anymore. Sorry to say.
The countries don't want our plastic, and I don't blame them.
No, I don't either. Yeah. But everyone that's watching that's like, oh, I do recycle. No, you don't. You think you do, but you don't. Yeah. Anyway. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Tracey. That was really awesome. All right. Does anybody have any other questions or comments for Tracey before we move forward? Well, thank you so much for being part of this exhibition. It's great having some sculpture in the exhibition. There's a couple, they're little, but they look so cool in the
Yeah.
exhibition.
Oh, thank you.
So thank you so much.
They kind of came across strange in the exhibition because the little bottled pieces, they look like they're black inside. That's because I photographed them against black. Just for everyone else that doesn't know, when you see them, I'm photographing them against blacks, because if I go photograph them against white, you won't see anything. So when you kind of cut them out for the online exhibition, it looks like they're black inside. That's why.
I can see that. I figured since we had black walls in there, I didn't try to change that either. Yeah. But yeah, I love them being in the exhibition. And now that I know more about them, that's even more fascinating. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great. And our last artist we have today is Deborah Kennedy. Deborah Kennedy's internationally exhibited practice confronts challenging issues from authoritarianism in Cold War East Germany to the anthropologic climate and environmental crisis. Evolving fluidly between mediums and subject matter, her works reflect pressure points gathered from her ongoing studies. Kennedy's concerns focus on creating a deeper understanding of our connectivity to and dependence on the larger natural world. She constructively refigures our evolving understanding of our mounting ecological vicissitudes, seeking potential pathways towards a thriving future. She believes in the possibility of hope, even as she envisions her art as using butterfly wings to beat down mountains. I love that phrase, Deborah, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, I want to start with a warm thank you to Katie and Shannon for making this event possible. And Katie, thanks so much for helping women artists develop and connect with a wider audience. So important. And I know how much it probably takes to do this. And thank you.
Thank you. It is an absolute pleasure. And I love that this show is a part of that. It's such an important thing. Looking forward to it.
Terrific. So I'm going to be referencing some earlier work too, so you can kind of see how I got to where I am today. And so I'm going to go and share screen here. And let me head up to the top. All right, everybody see that now? Everybody see the screen?
We're good.
Okay, terrific. So I'm a visual artist, an author, and I taught for many years, and my book kind of made it so that I did a lot of speaking pre-COVID, where I would, I wrote a poetry book, and I would read the poetry and share the illustrations. So I'm going to start actually a while ago and a ways away from here, which is, this is the Berlin Wall in 1989. I was the last artist to do a series of large-scale installations on the surface of the Berlin Wall. And this is one of them. It was called The Writing on the Wall. And as most people know, at this time, East Berlin was a very harsh military police state, known for summary executions and arrests and torture. And a lot of people were trying to get out across the wall. So I collected the hopes and fears of ordinary people from East Berlin, West Berlin, and America. This was done in the American sector at this time. West Berlin was still under the administration of the Allied countries. So you can see I'm putting up these little plates. Oh my gosh, who is that? That young girl, who is that? So I inscribed metal plates with these hopes and fears that I had collected. And the East German military came out 9 times. This is the 9th time they came out. And when they did, I and the people who were helping me would withdraw across the border where they could not go. And the man closest to the camera and the man with the camera are both Stasi. The Stasi were the secret police of East Germany. And he's apparently videotaping the work. And then he turned around and turned the camera on the crowd. This was sort of the most tense moment of the day because there were 150 people standing there, and they hated the Stasi in West Germany. So hopes and fears are seen as primary motivating human emotions. And so the wall itself, to me, seemed like an example of, this intractable problem based on these opposing hopes and fears. And these are all German tourists. I stayed there for a month and maintained the peace while I was there. So I was primarily doing socio-political work on issues like censorship and people power and like that. And then when I came home, I had my son, and the internet was sort of developing at this point. And I started getting more and more information about the environment and becoming more concerned. So I had a museum show at the DSSA Museum at Santa Clara University. And this is one of the exhibits that was part of it. And it was called Project Nexus. So Nexus means connections, and you can see this circle down below with all the, you can see a little bit of the wires there. And so one of my goals is to help people understand how intimately we're woven into the web of life. And I was inspired in this show by a professor called Professor W.D. Billings. What you see here, I call this the ring of life in the front there. And I created a sculpture. We're talking about how much time things take. That one part took 1 month. So that's a sculpture with a wire armature with a human heart there. And so this is the ring of life. This is where we can act and we can change things. This is the ring of the lost on the other side of this curtain of leaves. And that's the things that have already gone extinct. We can't change that. I covered the entire floor with redwood chip bark, and that was quite an experience, let me tell you right there. But this exhibition was inspired by this work by Professor Billings. This is really, I think of this as my religious symbol here. And it's really a scientific illustration by Professor Billings. And he gave me permission to use his actual illustration. So this is his drawing, his original drawing. To me, it's a beautiful representation of the web of life. All the forces and substances that act and interact to creating a living environment for a plant at the center are listed on the outside. And so, of course, there are humans and animals and other plants, the soil, fire, gravity, topographical and geographic position, different types of radiation, the atmosphere, the wind, the temperature. So he was trying to understand what creates the conditions for life. Now, he was a botanist and he put a plant at the center, but honestly, it's pretty much the same holocoenotic circle of environmental complexity that gifts each one of us our lives each day. Especially here in America, we tend to think of ourselves as individuals, as separate from what's around us. But I invite you to think about however many meals you've eaten today, whatever you drank today, the air you've been breathing, the clothes you're wearing. All of this intimately connects us with the larger natural world. The fruit that you ate, what conditions did that grow under? We are then linked to however that fruit, however all that food was created and treated. So my hope was that if people started to understand how intimately woven we are into this web of life, perhaps we would start taking the slightest bit of care of it. So I wanted people to experience this as a three-dimensional interactive object. And it's very difficult, it turns out, to make a line in space. So I ended up using piano technology. And I worked with a wonderful woodworker to create this. And, so many, all the research, finally found someone who gave me the pins that are used to hold you can see all the little pins around there. And we used all the piano technology, the various parts. This is a 15-layer maple plywood to hold the pins and so on. And from the sun's position, there was like the little photons going out. And from the human position, it became a musical instrument. And when this was exhibited, I worked with students, and there were other musical components to the show. And they created compositions to play on these various instruments. So it was like, what's the vibration? What's the sound we're sending out into the world? I added this piece because this is a plastic piece I did, I don't know, 10 years ago or so. And it's called Hour of Decision. And so here's my plastic woman sitting in this river of plastic. And she has sort of this halo of CDs behind her. CDs are so beautiful, my God. But who would think at that time to create a technology like that, almost, completely unrecyclable? They just are, they're one of these monstrous hybrids. But she's holding an hourglass in her hands and thinking, we could change this. But here we are 10 years later and have not really changed that, right? So this is all, a life-size figure. I'm now on to the Borrowed Time exhibit, and very often that holocoenotic circle shows up in my work, and here it is. It kind of looks like looking up at the clouds and maybe a moon rising up over the clouds. And this is currently on exhibit in Germany. This piece was made for an exhibition that two women sculptors, they invited other women sculptors to create drawings. And this is made with copper. Copper's a very, I started using that on the Berlin Wall. And since then, I've learned that every living creature, being, person, plant has to have a little bit of copper to be healthy. So many mineral, so like lead is not a friendly metal, right? But copper is a metal that we all have inside it. So for me, and it's also wire and pots and so on. It's a domestic metal that, I just love the warmth of it. It just of sort of unending fascination to me. So this is called Every Part Wedded to the Whole. And that's actually the title of a chapter from my book. And that's really the teaching of the holocoenotic theory of environmental complexity, that every single thing is connected to everything else. And here I'm not depicting nature, I'm kind of trying to echo the processes. You can see all the layers, this took, it's only 11 by 14, but it took an enormous amount of time, all the layering that occurred there. And it kind of makes you think you're looking at like sunset clouds or something like that. This piece is called Rising. And it's a painting, it's about 4 feet wide. And I did this on kind of a metallic surface. Again, love those metallics. And that looks a bit like a sun rising up above a landscape there. But actually, it's a depiction of a human egg. So it's a portrait of each one of us at the very beginning of our lives, right? And it's rising up over this textured landscape below. And that was made from one day I was walking near a high school and there was a physics book that somebody had torn pages out of and thrown on the ground. So being an artist with also a very full storage area, I picked it up. Then I used these images down below there. So you can see there's a gyroscope, and this was imaging a space station, and these an ancient orrery, and all these circular forms, right? So physics was one of the foundational sciences that led us to our ability to the extraordinary control we have over, apparent control, perhaps I should say, over the world today, right? So we can fly, and trains, and our chemistry. It's just extraordinary, our creativity and the quality of our lives at this point. However, sometimes it's like without a care, without the slightest care. So very few people realize the kind of impact that our chemistry is having on our own genetic material. So when a fetus is forming, at the very beginning, it's really in a female pattern, and it requires a huge surge of hormones to change that into a male. Very fragile at that point. The slightest variation in we're talking parts per billion here. These hormones are active in such small quantities in our bodies. It's simply fantastic. And then it's a cascade of hormonal signals that directs the healthy development of our neurological system and our reproductive systems. So again, the slightest variations in these chemical cascades can set the whole system awry. I've only heard one doctor ever reference what I see happening. And he was a doctor of a children's hospital in New York. And he said, our children are experiencing an epidemic of disease. And it's coming on so fast and it's so widespread, it cannot be genetic, because that's what people tend to say about autism. Oh, it's just genetic. And certainly there are genetic components to any illness. However, we are proceeding with utter disregard for our own precious genetic materials, with utter disregard for our breast milk, which now has hundreds of chemicals in it. So this is perhaps a naively hopeful vision that maybe someday we will start to care about our own genetic materials. Some Native American First Peoples used to say, weigh every decision by the impact on the seventh generation. Apparently, we do not have the slightest care about our own children, nothing. So again, a little, perhaps faint hope that that our eggs will rise in a happier environment. This piece is called Plastic Plankton. And you might look at it and kind of like, what am I looking at here? You kind of sense that there are layers. And here my mother was a toll artist, which was a type of art they did in Europe, painting on trays and so on. And she also did some reverse glass painting. So I got inspired by that. And I worked on this for months to develop the technique. And everybody was like, that's so cool, you should do more of those. Oops, I haven't. So I took a piece of plexiglass that was all scraped up. I like to use those recycled materials. And some of the white lines you're looking at are on the front of that plexiglass. All of the images of the plankton are on the back of the plexiglass. And then I painted behind that. So those dark areas, I used to go swimming in plankton-laden lakes, and you'd see the light lancing down through the green water. And so I was trying to kind of get that feeling. So that's on the back of the plexiglass. And so there's many layers of work here. And then the kind of shiny stuff you see, that's recycled plastic that's behind the piece of plexiglass. So they used to do that with the reverse glass painting as well. And so these are depictions of various types of plankton. And I'm especially thinking about phytoplankton here. Phytoplankton are small plants. There can be up to 1 million of them in a single teaspoon of water. Extraordinary. When I was a little girl, I was told that the grass and trees were producing the oxygen I was breathing, and surely they do. But we've found out that phytoplankton are producing 50, 60, 70% of the oxygen on the planet, and they are responsible for the first oxygenation of the planet that led to the development of plants and then animals. So we have a tremendous, it's one of the ways, every time you take a breath, you can go like, thanks, plankton. It's the way we're connected to little parts of the world that are so far away. Let's see, I don't want to go on too long here. I have a very interesting plankton story, but I'm not going to say that. Let's see. Oh, microplastics. So I just have to bring up here that the plankton are starting to eat the microplastics in the ocean, and they are the base of the food chain. So when we eat fish now, of course, we're eating microplastics. We're inhaling microplastics. There's microplastics in all of our water, in all of our bodies. Not sure if it's crossing the blood-brain barrier at this point. Some people are developing intestinal problems because they have so much plastic in their gut. And certainly many animals are being killed by mistaking plastic for food. So let's see, did I end on a cheery note? Wait, let's see, I'm going to tell the story. Plankton, when they are exposed to solar radiation, produce little molecules, chemical molecules that then go up in the atmosphere. And water vapor condenses around these molecules and they make clouds. So they can help control the weather. They help protect themselves and other life forms from excess solar radiation. So I always like to end on a little bit of a happier note. There's a little bit of a happier note. There's part of nature that's working for us in such remarkable ways that we just discovered this in the past few years. Fascinating, fascinating. So I think I should stop now. This is my book, and these are illustrations from my book. And there's my holocoenotic again. So thank you so much to all of you, and for your attention and interest. And again, to Katie and Shannon, thank you so much. Let me stop share here. There we go.
Thank you so much, Deborah. That was amazing. That story about the Berlin Wall was just, wow, that's great. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
I do. First of all, Deborah, I just want to say how much I appreciate all the different materials and methods you use. I think it's really awesome that writing and sculpture and painting. I'm jealous of that. I think I need to like branch out a little bit more. So, but with that said, what are some of the challenges that come to you from working in different mediums or creating your artwork?
Oh, well, numerous and many. Someone who wrote a really nice review of my book said, it was thoughtful, thought-provoking, and soul stirring, and I was like, oh my gosh, I want to meet this person, but it was anonymous. And they also said restless intelligence. And I went like, oh my God, this person knows me from reading the book. Oh my God. So definitely someone who, like I said, that plankton piece, I know I should make more of those, but it's like, once I've made one, okay, I'm done. The show that I'm working on for Shannon and I and some other folks are part of the Terra Art Collective, and we're going to have a show up in Point Reyes. The opening is August 27th. Great town, come on down. It's at Gallery Route 1. And for that, I just, oh my gosh, you know, I've done woodworking, I've worked with human hair, I've done clay work, I've done painting, I've worked with glass, reflective glass, you know, it's just like, you know, at a certain point I was going like, Deborah, rein it in, girl, you know, and also I've had failures, you know. So, you know, I would have something I was working on, I didn't have adhesion or things cracked, and, you know, I'd do it over and over, it just keep cracking. I had to just rip it all off after 2 weeks of work, you know. So, yeah, I think the great thing about focusing in a material and method is that you get really good at it, right? You know, I'm sort of like with the Buddhists, you know, beginner mind, I'm beginner artist all the time.
You just like to explore, right? Learning and exploring in adventures and arts.
You know how you have that little voice inside, you know, I meditate and they're always trying to get you to kind of quiet the voice. And I realized that when you're making art, the voice has a job. It's like always there. Well, why don't you try that? Mine is always getting like, hey, that, you know, that might be it. Why don't you try that? You know.
Well, I'm glad you're not writing it in, because I think following the fascination in that way is a really exciting thing, really. You never know what's going to happen next.
That's right. That's right. Never know. That's for sure.
Do we have any other questions or comments?
I had a comment, just kind of a comment about everything. Sorry, I don't have my camera on, everyone. I'm still here though. I just wanted to say, Deborah, it was really interesting listening to your story and your history, and like we were just talking about, everyone was talking about how you have all of these things going on in the writing and not just different types of art, but you know, as Katie said, the story with the Berlin Wall, and it was really interesting. But as I was listening to you, I was thinking, and Michelle as well, it's always interesting for me, and I'm sure probably for both of you as well, as each of us are talking, the similarities, you know, that are woven through. Obviously we're in this show together, but that doesn't always necessarily bring it together that much. And so as you guys are talking, it's like I'm going, yes, exactly. And when you were talking about the microplastics, which I just sort of barely touched on that, so I'm glad you brought that up too, because that's an enormous problem. And I also was thinking to myself, you were like, well, I don't want to be such a downer, and I'm sure all of us kind of feel that way, but how can you not be? It's hard to not be, you know, it's hard to be positive in with this sort of issues that we're working with. So you know,
it is
what are we gonna do?
It's a big problem, and you know, I feel like I had a lot of challenges in my career because of it. One time I was introducing my work to a local curator, and I was, you know, the thing that I was on at that point was dry cleaning, which they were using PERC, incredibly toxic material, like cancer circles around every dry cleaner, right? California's gotten rid of it. And so I'm explaining all this to her, and then I can see her kind of like, you know, okay, yeah, okay. And then I leave and I realize she's a dry clean queen. She cannot hear this, right? And this is so threatening to her. And you know, it's one of the reasons why I focus on that holocoenotic theory of environmental complexity, because that's a more positive vision. Can we understand how important you know, the whole web of life is to each one of us each day of our lives? It's so easy to go buy food and yeah, whatever, you know. But do we really think about where that's coming from? You know, the human toll as well as the toll on the larger world. And do we think about how, you know, oh, one thing goes extinct, that means that's impacting that over there, and that's impacting that over there. And as this web of life gets more and more afraid, what do we think is going to happen here, you know? So that's been one of the ways that I've tried to deal with it. Yeah, but it's and also it's one of the reasons why I did my book, because I went like, I'm going to aestheticize this so much people just aren't going to be able to resist it. So I did illustrations for every single image. At the end I was going like, really, Deborah, what are you doing here? So and I did poetry. I did little essays on it. And that did help me to reach out, because I started being able to do these talks where I would read the poetry and share the imagery and so on. And I was a teacher for many years, and it kind of let me. I like to talk, so it let me kind of experience that with people. But I also had a problem there, like people would go like, she's going to come bum us out again, So it is, but I say, we're the only adults this planet has. If we're not willing to deal with it, who is, right? I mean, the teenagers have stepped up in the past few years, but who is?
Speaking of your book, is it available? Where can people find that?
Well, I have 730 in my studio. So you can definitely find them there. Sadly, my press was a victim of COVID. So the fellow who ran it, he was trying to sell it, and maybe that would have worked in another time. He was trying to sell the press. So I have a lot of books if anybody wants one. This is the new definition of an author, somebody who has 500 books in their basement. But yeah. I guess, I could give an email address. I didn't put that on the front. Maybe I'll put that in the chat, and people could, if anybody was interested, they could let me know, and I'd be happy to send it to them. So yeah, pretty exciting though. It's like doing what you love is what's important. And I think that's, in Romania, remember Romania under Ceausescu? He was a terrible authoritarian ruler. The only thing that could go in and out of the country was that was freely moving in and out was postcard art, mail art. And the people in Romania said this was so important to us to have something that came from the outside, something that showed us that people cared. And it helped them hold out during this dreadful time. So I think we have to imagine that we're helping in various ways, right?
I think so. I think art comes from a place of hope. It comes from a place of anger and rage and everything else as well, and especially when we're talking about this environmental art. But I see so much hope in it as well, and I appreciate so much what all of you are doing for that reason. And Shannon, thank you so much again for building this amazing show. I'm so proud to have it in the gallery, and I thank you all so much. Let me read this out for you, Deborah. It's djkennedyart@gmail.com.
There you go.
All right.
Yeah. And it's sort of, send what you can. It's like $7 to mail. So whatever you can chip in would be great.
Awesome. That's wonderful. Well, Shannon, did you have anything that you wanted to share before?
Well, first of all, I just wanted to thank everyone who came to these talks. It was really wonderful. And the artist, I always get so inspired after these talks, and I get all these ideas. I have all these notes that I write down. So it's so important. I think I have just like one last question for each of the artists. You can answer it. You don't have to. If you have any thoughts on it, I asked the other group of artists this, and I think it's important as kind of eco artist or artists trying to make a change. As you're making your work, are your intentions to educate or to inspire action, or maybe a little bit of both? Like what, as artists, we make these things and put them out there, and what's your hope when people interact or see them?
Mine's to make activists 100%. I love making art, but art by itself is not going to change things, and we're in dire straits. And so that's why I focus so much on just trying to educate people, and in the hopes that something will spark, and they'll want to find out what's happening with the wolves and what they can do, and donate money to an organization that's suing the Department of the Interior, or get involved some other way. But yeah, for me, it's all about making activists and engaging people in that way, and then also bearing witness. I feel like I'm bearing witness.
Yeah, that's very important.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a teacher, so I had a lot of faith in the idea that teaching people would affect change. And at a certain point in my life, I had a son, I had a husband who traveled all the time, I was teaching, and I was just throwing myself into my work and doing these large scale installations, which, and then, I realized that I had sort of this underlying feeling like I was responsible for changing this. And, I started having health problems. I started going like, wait a minute, Deborah, that's not right, So I kind of backed off in a certain way. I obviously didn't stop, but I also changed because I felt like, I was going to do a show, Do Lookers Do? And I started realizing, like, you go to an opening, everybody has the glass of wine. It's really just like a social organization. It's not really, there are very few people there who are thinking, and I would always have these reams of things on the wall, like, this is going to change. You got this, and I'd be grabbing people by the lapels. Do you understand the endocrine disruption? And, not the most effective way to affect change, perhaps. So I got a little bit involved politically. This was a big question among artists in the early 1900s. Can you just try and affect change through your art? And this, thing that I was reading, they went like, no, you can't. You have to also get really engaged. And so I say, if everybody does a little bit on every election, obviously it could go better. But, we have a rabid group of people who are highly engaged, right? And then we have a very large group of people who are pretty complacent and not particularly engaged. So, that's one thing that I changed to try and, have some more of an impact. And also I was hoping by doing the book that people who listen to poetry, they're getting ideas more directly, people who look at things, they would go like, wow, that's really cool. That's really beautiful. But, when I started to try and explain the ideas, I didn't always feel like they were coming across. So it's that kind of, frustration that also led me to do the book. Yeah. But we got to do what we can do, right?
Yeah, I think that for me, it's I guess it is for all of us. It's really just about perhaps making people look at things a little bit differently. I do a lot of artwork that's not environmental, so I'm not completely, as hardcore activist, perhaps as definitely as Michelle, which I applaud everything that you do. But I think that, I can sit and tell people you shouldn't buy plastic bottles all day long. you know. And I think that it just becomes a numb thing after a while. You know, we're so used to, or society is so used to, you know, you shouldn't do this and we shouldn't do that, and you know, flyers and things like that that you just are kind of bombarded with all the time. So I think for me, when we can make art that sort of makes me perhaps people look at it a little bit different. I don't feel like my work is saying, you know, you shouldn't buy plastic bottles, but it's saying like, hey, this is sort of an interesting look at what could happen or what is happening. So, you know, I think that's the difference between making art and just, you know, taking it to the streets and trying to talk to people, which is important, but you know, that doesn't always get through. I think there's just so much that we hear. Yeah, that's my intention anyway.
Wonderful, thank you. I think, yeah, that's important, of like using all the tools we have as artists to communicate, to share the beauty and the destruction, and also, as you were saying, Tracey, to like have people look at things in a different way, like that they wouldn't necessarily think about. Like your fossil sculptures are really fascinating, and someone might go, oh, wait a minute, yeah, this is going to be the future, and that's frightening, you know. So I think it's so important that we all use the different tools that we have, and as artists we have many, so it's so important to share them.
Yeah, and Michelle had mentioned earlier about, you know, making art that's more beautiful or gruesome or whatnot. And I don't know that my work's as much beautiful as perhaps interesting, but I think that when you can kind of take that approach and make something that people want to look at, you know, I'm not saying that, you know, offensive looking work isn't bad. Sometimes that's called for and that's what needs to be done. But that can kind of immediately turn people off. And I think if you can make something interesting or beautiful or something that people want to look at, the longer they look at it, the longer they're going to think about it, hopefully. So
Thank you everybody.
Do we have any more questions or anything else, Shannon? All right. Well, we will go ahead then and shut this down for the evening, but this has been wonderful. I appreciate so much all of you coming and sharing your stories and sharing your art and sharing these resources with us. It's such a huge thing, and I am so proud to be able to have your art in the gallery. It means so much to me. Thank you again, Shannon, for this show. It's beyond anything I could have imagined when we first started talking about it. And yeah, and I just love it so much. Thank you to everyone who has come to support these artists and who will later on YouTube as well. This should be going up in the next so it'll be there for everybody who wasn't able to come tonight. But thank you all, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks everybody.
Thanks, Shannon. Thanks, Katie.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks.